In the shadowed vaults of eternity, where oaths forged in blood whisper like forgotten winds, one vow alone could shatter the throne of night. The castle loomed like a scar upon the mist-shrouded cliffs of the Carpathians, its spires piercing the storm-laced sky as if defying the heavens themselves. Rain lashed against the ancient stone, a relentless dirge that echoed the turmoil within. Ilara Voss, born 32 years ago in the soot-choked alleys of Victorian London, had come here not by choice, but by the cruel arithmetic of desperation. Abandoned by a family that viewed her wasting illness as a divine curse, disillusioned by physicians who peddled elixirs of false hope, she was a woman frayed at the edges, her once vibrant auburn hair now dulled to ash, her skin translucent as parchment stretched over fragile bones. Tuberculosis had claimed her vitality, leaving her a specter in her own life, coughing blood into lace handkerchiefs that she could no longer afford. Her deepest trauma lingered from the night her lover, a soldier lost to the Crimean War, had whispered promises of forever before vanishing into the fog of battle. Her desire, buried beneath layers of resentment, was simply to feel alive once more, to touch something unbroken in a world that had forsaken her. She had heard the rumors in the taverns of Bucharest, whispers of a reclusive lord who offered sanctuary to the dying, a man whose gaze could pierce the veil between worlds. Desperation drove her carriage through the mountain passes, the wheels groaning like weary hearts. Now, as she stepped into the grand hall, the air thickened with the scent of aged velvet and melting wax. Candelabras flickered, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across tapestries depicting ancient battles, vampiric kings clashing with human armies under blood moons. The warmth was illusory. A chill seeped from the stones, wrapping around her like a shroud. From the balcony above, Victor Draven watched her. The vampire king, eternal at over 5 centuries, bore the weight of his immortality like a crown of thorns. Born in the shadowed courts of medieval Transylvania to a noble house torn by war, he had been turned during a siege against Ottoman invaders, his maker an enigmatic queen who vanished into legend, leaving him with a guilt that festered like an open wound. Ethical to a fault, he ruled his hidden realm not with tyranny, but with a solitary code, never to sire another, never to entangle mortals in the curse of undeath. His traumas were etched in the lines of his pale face, betrayals from allies who sought his throne, the memory of a human wife slain in the crossfire of political intrigue, her death, the spark that birthed his oath of isolation. Solitude was his penance, his desire a quiet yearning for redemption, for a love that might absolve the blood on his hands without damning another soul. Yet tonight, as Ilara's frail form entered his domain, something stirred, a flicker of recognition, as if fate had woven their threads long before. "Welcome, wanderer," his voice resonated, deep and resonant as distant thunder carrying down from the gloom. He descended the spiral staircase, his black cloak billowing like raven wings, boots silent on the polished marble. Up close, his eyes gleamed like polished obsidian, holding secrets older than the castle itself. "What storm has driven you to my gates?" Ilara lifted her gaze, her breath ragged, the metallic tang of blood lingering on her tongue from the journey's toll. She clutched a silver locket at her throat, a relic from her lost love, its chain cool against her fevered skin, its surface engraved with a thorny rose, a symbol she had carried since childhood, now her anchor against oblivion. "Sanctuary, my lord," she murmured, her voice a fragile thread. "I've come to beg for it. Death hounds me, and I've nowhere left to run." Victor's expression softened, a rare fracture in his armored composure. He gestured to a velvet chaise by the roaring hearth, where flames licked at logs like hungry tongues, their glow painting his features in hues of crimson and gold. As she sank into the cushions, the fire's heat warred with the cold knot in her chest. He knelt before her, not in subservience, but with the gravity of one who had knelt before kings and gods alike. "Sanctuary I can grant," he said, his fingers, long and elegant, veins tracing paths like rivers of midnight, brushing her wrist to feel her pulse, faint and erratic. "But tell me, what life clings to you that you would fight for it still?" She hesitated, the intimacy of his touch sending a shiver through her, not of fear, but of something forbidden, a spark in the ashes of her despair. Rationalizing it as delirium, she spoke of her abandonment, the hollow ache of unfulfilled dreams, the war that had stolen her heart and left her adrift. Victor listened, his solitude cracking like ice under spring thaw. In her words, he heard echoes of his own losses, the political wars that had razed his mortal world, the betrayals that forged his oath. To protect his kind from the chaos of human entanglements, to seal alliances through blood pacts alone, never love. As the night deepened, rain drumming against leaded windows like impatient fingers, he shared fragments of his truth, not the fangs, not yet, but the weight of eternity. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, he confessed, his voice a caress laced with sorrow. But choice comes at a cost. It binds you to shadows, to memories that refuse to fade. Alara's eyes, green as forest depths, met his. For the first time in years, her heart stuttered not from illness, but from the pull of his presence, a magnetic grief that mirrored her own. She resisted, labeling it pity, a dying woman's fancy. Yet as he rose to pour her mulled wine from a crystal decanter, the steam rising like ghosts, she felt the invisible presence of death hovering, its scythe glinting in the firelight. In that moment of quiet revelation, Victor faced his first fracture. To heal her would mean breaking his oath, inviting her into a world of fire and blood. But to let her fade. He extended the goblet, their fingers brushing, and in that touch, a ritual began. Not of words, but of unspoken choice. Life or the abyss. Love or the throne's cold isolation. As thunder cracked overhead, Alara drank, unaware that the wine carried a trace of his essence, a subtle elixir to steady her breath. Her cough eased, color blooming faintly in her cheeks, but Victor's gaze darkened with foreboding. Far beyond the castle walls, whispers stirred in the vampire courts, rumors of a Dhampir heir, born of forbidden union, whose blood could seal or shatter alliances in the brewing war against encroaching human empires. And now, this mortal woman had breached his defenses. What if she was the key? What if loving her meant not redemption, but the kingdom's ruin? As Ilara's eyes fluttered with unexpected vigor, Victor turned away, the thorny rose on her locket catching the light, a symbol that now bound them, promising both salvation and betrayal. The fire's embers pulsed like a dying heart, casting erratic shadows that clawed at the walls of the grand hall. Ilara Voss sat ensconced in the velvet chaise, the goblet's warmth seeping into her palms, chasing away the chill that had long been her constant companion. The wine's rich, spiced notes lingered on her tongue, mingling with the faint, coppery aftertaste of her own blood, a reminder of the fragility she could no longer ignore. Her chest rose and fell with less labored effort now, the elixir's subtle magic weaving through her veins like threads of forgotten sunlight. She watched Victor Draven's retreating form, his silhouette framed by the arched window where rain traced silver paths down the leaded panes, blurring the world beyond into a watercolor of gray and black. He paused at the threshold of an adjoining chamber, his hand resting on the carved oak door, its surface etched with motifs of entwined thorns and crowns, emblems of his fractured reign. The air between them hummed with unspoken tension, thick as the fog rolling in from the Carpathian peaks. Ilara's fingers tightened around the locket, the thorny rose pressing into her skin like a lover's bite. It had been her mother's gift, passed down through generations of women who had known loss, a widow's token from the Napoleonic Wars, a daughter's farewell before plague claimed her. Now it felt heavier, as if absorbing the weight of this stranger's gaze. "My lord," she called softly, her voice gaining a tentative strength that surprised her. "You speak of costs and shadows, but you offer no mirror to reflect them. Who are you, truly, that a dying woman stirs such reservation in your eyes?" Victor turned, his obsidian gaze locking onto hers with the intensity of a blade unsheathed. The candelabra's flames bowed in a sudden draft, their wax dripping like slow tears onto the marble floor. He crossed the room in measured strides, the hem of his cloak whispering against the stone, evoking the hush of crypts long sealed. Kneeling once more before her, he was close enough that she could discern the faint veins of silver at his temples, relics of centuries etched by moonlight rather than time. "I am Victor Draven," he said, his tone a velvet rumble laced with ancient sorrow. "Ruler of these shadowed lands, guardian of oaths that bind tighter than iron. And you, Ilara Voss, have wandered into a web where every thread leads to choice, or to ruin." She searched his face, the high cheekbones sharp as sculpted marble, the lips curved in perpetual melancholy. There was no monstrosity in him, only a profound weariness, as if he carried the ghosts of empires on his shoulders. The political wars that had shaped him flickered in her mind's eye from his earlier words. The Ottoman sieges that razed his mortal kin, the betrayals within his own immortal court, where allies turned to daggers for the throne. He had forged his oath in the aftermath, a vow to never sire a companion, to seal alliances through calculated pacts of blood and fealty, sparing love the curse of eternity. Yet here he was, drawn to her like a moth to a forbidden flame. As the storm outside swelled, thunder rolling like the drums of distant battles, Victor extended a hand, helping her to her feet. Her legs trembled, but not from weakness alone. His touch ignited a current, warm and insistent, racing up her arm to pool in her core. She rationalized it as the wine's illusion, a fever dream born of isolation. "Walk with me," he murmured, guiding her toward a corridor lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes following like silent judges. The air grew cooler, scented with damp earth and faint incense, as they ascended a winding stair to a library bathed in the pallid glow of a single chandelier. Bookshelves towered like ancient sentinels, volumes bound in leather that smelled of forgotten spells and spilled ink. They settled into high-backed chairs by a window overlooking the cliffs, where lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the roiling sea below. Ilara's cough had subsided to a mere rasp, allowing her to breathe deeply for the first time in months. Gratitude warred with suspicion in her breast. This sanctuary felt too perfect, too laced with peril. "You heal with a sip of wine?" she asked, her green eyes narrowing. "Or is this some alchemist's trick meant to lure the desperate?" Victor's laugh was low, a sound like wind through hollow reeds, devoid of mirth. "No trick, but a mercy born of necessity. My blood tempers the edge of death, if only for a night." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the firelight catching the signet ring on his finger, a thorny circlet mirroring her locket's design, a coincidence that sent a shiver down her spine. "I have seen too many fade, Ilara. Mortals like you, broken by wars and whims of fate, my own wife." His voice trailed, the confession hanging like smoke. She was human once, a noble woman caught in the crossfire of vampiric intrigue, her throat torn not by him, but by rivals hungry for his power. Her death had sealed his isolation, a guilt that echoed in every empty hall of the castle. Ilara reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing his, the contact electric. In that touch, she glimpsed fragments, not visions, but emotions, the raw ache of loss, the ethical torment of power unchecked. He was no predator, but a sentinel, solitary in his vigil against the encroaching human empires that now armed themselves with iron and fire, threatening to unearth the old pacts. "I am not her," she whispered, pulling back, her heart pounding with resisted longing. "And you are not my savior. This pull between us, it's madness. I came for life, not entanglement." Yet as the hours slipped into the small hours, their conversation deepened, weaving through philosophies of existence. Victor spoke of memory's double edge, the beauty of human suffering, fleeting and pure, against the eternal drag of undeath, where every face blurred into oblivion. Ilara countered with her disillusions, the abandonment by kin who saw her illness as contagion, the lover's letters that ceased amid the Crimean mud, leaving her adrift in a faithless world. Death lingered in the room's corners, its presence a cold draught, urging her toward surrender. But Victor's proximity kindled something defiant, a desire to claim more than scraps of time. A ritual unfolded in the quiet. He traced the locket's rose with a fingertip, not possessive, but reverent, as if recognizing its symbolism from his own shadowed past. "This thorn," he said, "reminds us that beauty wounds deepest." Her pulse quickened under his scrutiny, the air thickening with unspoken invitation. She resisted, rationalizing the warmth in her veins as borrowed time, not the stirrings of inevitable love. Yet when he leaned closer, his breath cool against her fevered cheek, she did not pull away. Far below, in the castle's undercroft, unrest brewed. Messengers from the vampire courts arrived under cover of storm, their cloaks sodden with rain and intrigue. Whispers of the Dhampir, Lilith Voss, Ilara's half-forgotten cousin, born of a forbidden union between a vampiric lord and a mortal seer, had ignited the councils. Exiled for her hybrid blood, which could forge unbreakable alliances or ignite civil war, Lilith sought the king's ear to rally against the human incursions. Her arrival was imminent. Her romance with Victor, a tangled history of passion and betrayal, now poised to clash with this new mortal thread. As dawn's first gray light filtered through the library's shutters, Victor rose abruptly, his expression fracturing with dread. Ilara, invigorated yet wary, followed his gaze to the window, where a raven perched on the sill, its eyes gleaming with unnatural intelligence. A harbinger from the courts. "What omen is this?" she asked, her voice laced with foreboding. He turned to her, the weight of his oath cracking further. To reveal the Dhampir's shadow, to entwine Ilara in the web of fire and blood, would transform sanctuary into battlefield. But as their eyes met, the thorny rose binding them pulsed with promise and peril. In that suspended breath, choice loomed: embrace the light she offered, or let the kingdom's wars consume them both. The raven cawed once, shattering the silence, and Victor knew the alliance's seal approached, forged not in pacts, but in the blood of unintended love. The raven's cry echoed through the library like a fracture in the soul of the night, its black wings unfurling against the paling sky, as if to mock the fragile peace Victor had woven. Ilara stood frozen by the window, her fingers still curled around the locket, the thorny rose's edges biting into her palm, a sharp reminder that sanctuary was but a veil over deeper thorns. The bird's eyes, unnaturally sharp, fixed on her for a heartbeat before it wheeled away into the mist, leaving behind the scent of wet feathers and distant smoke. Victor's face, illuminated by the chandelier's dying flicker, tightened with a shadow of old wars, his ethical resolve warring against the tide of inevitability. "Come," he said, his voice a low command laced with urgency, extending his hand once more. She took it without hesitation this time, the contact no longer a spark, but a steady flame, warming the chill that death had etched into her bones. They descended the winding stair in silence, the castle's corridors unfolding like the veins of some ancient beast, pulsing with hidden life. Tapestries whispered against the walls as they passed, scenes of vampiric legions clashing under crimson skies, human empires crumbling in flames, betrayals etched in threads of gold and black. The air grew heavier, laced with the metallic tang of torchlight and the faint, underlying rot of secrets long buried. Alara's steps faltered only once, a remnant cough bubbling up like a protest from her healing lungs, but Victor's grip steadied her, his cool skin a contrast to the fever that still simmered beneath hers. She rationalized the pull, this inexorable draw toward him, as the elixir's lingering haze, a borrowed vigor masking the void. Yet in the quiet spaces between their footfalls, doubt gnawed. Why her, a discarded soul from London's fog-shrouded underbelly, drawn to this king of shadows? Her traumas resurfaced in fragments. The abandonment by siblings who bolted doors against her contagion, the lover's final letter stained with Crimean blood, promising return that never came. Desires she had long suppressed stirred, not just survival, but a life textured with touch, with meaning beyond the slow unraveling of flesh. They emerged into a lower chamber, a vaulted hall where moonlight filtered through cracked stained glass, painting the flagstones in fractured hues of ruby and sapphire. A long oak table dominated the space, scarred from centuries of councils, flanked by high-backed chairs like thrones for the damned. Victor released her hand and moved to a sideboard, pouring amber liquid from a decanter into 2 crystal goblets, the same spiced wine, she suspected, though now it gleamed with an otherworldly sheen. "The courts stir," he said, handing her one, his obsidian eyes reflecting the liquid's glow. "Omen or harbinger, it matters not. What approaches will test us both." She sipped, the warmth spreading like liquid sunlight, easing the ache in her chest further. Color bloomed in her cheeks, her auburn hair catching the light as if rekindling from ash. "Test? You speak in riddles, Victor. If this is your world of oaths and shadows, then unveil it. I came seeking life, not veiled threats." Her voice held a newfound edge, defiance born of the strength he had unwittingly gifted her. Death hovered still, a silent spectator in the vault's corners, its presence a cool draft that raised gooseflesh on her arms, whispering of the choice she might soon face: fade into oblivion or step into the fire of his eternity. He set his goblet down untouched, pacing the length of the table, his cloak trailing like spilled ink. The room's textures enveloped them, the velvet drapes heavy with dust, the wood's polished grain worn smooth by countless hands, the distant rumble of thunder syncing with her quickening pulse. "My oath," he began, his tone introspective, philosophical, as if unburdening to the stones themselves, "was forged in blood and betrayal. 5 centuries ago, during the sieges that devoured Transylvania, I lost everything: family, faith, the woman I swore to protect. She was mortal, like you, caught in the crossfire of immortal ambitions. Rivals within my own kind sought the throne, allying with human warlords to unseat me. Her death was their message. Love weakens the crown." Alara's breath caught, the parallel to her own losses a mirror she could not avert. The thorny rose on her locket seemed to pulse, a shared symbol bridging their fractured worlds. His ring bearing its twin, a relic from that very wife, passed through the ages as a curse and a vow. "And so you swore solitude," she murmured, stepping closer, the air between them charged with intimacy, emotional and raw. "No companions, no entanglements, alliances sealed in pacts alone, blood for blood, to guard against the wars that rage eternal. But I am no alliance. I am broken, Victor, not a weapon." His gaze softened, the guilt that marked him, a deep scar across his jaw from that fateful night, catching the light like a silver vein. "Yet you pierce the veil. The elixir I gave you. It binds us, subtly, inevitably. To heal you fully would mean offering the choice, mortality's end or eternity's dawn. But now, The Dhampir comes. The word hung heavy, a revelation laced with peril. Lilith Voss, your bloodkin, half forgotten perhaps, born of a union forbidden even among my kind. Her mother, a seer from your London shadows, lay with a lord of my court. Lilith's hybrid blood could seal the alliances we need against the human empires rising, armies armed with silver and stake, encroaching on our hidden realms. She was my companion once, in passion's fire, before betrayal drove her into exile. Her return promises redemption for the kingdom, but at what cost to us? Alara recoiled, the goblet trembling in her grasp, wine sloshing like spilled blood. Lilith Voss, a name from faded family tales, a cousin whispered of in scandal, vanished into the night after a forbidden tryst. The connection twisted in her gut, not just kin, but a rival shadow, her romance with Victor a tangled web of fire and blood that now threatened to ensnare Alara. Rationalization crumbled. This was no delirium, but a ritual unfolding. The choice of life now entangled with love's curse, eternity's throne, and the brewing wars of betrayal. "She comes for you," Alara said, her voice a whisper of despair and defiance, green eyes blazing with the light of her awakening strength. "And I, what am I in this? A pawn? Or the fracture in your oath?" Victor's hand cupped her cheek, cool and tender, the touch igniting a sensory storm. The velvet brush of his thumb, the faint scent of ancient forests on his skin, the distant patter of rain like tears on the glass above. In that moment, the invisible death retreated, yielding to the heat of their proximity, but the air crackled with transformation's edge. He leaned in, lips hovering near hers, the ritual of choice crystallizing. Not a kiss, but a breath shared, a vow unspoken. "You are the light in my shadows, Alara, but Lilith's arrival seals nothing without fire and blood. To love you means breaking everything, oath, throne, perhaps the fragile peace." She did not pull away, her heart thundering against the cage of her ribs, the thorny rose pressing harder as if to draw first blood. Resistance melted into inevitability. The love she had denied blooming like a wound, redemptive, damning, eternal. Yet as their lips brushed in tentative promise, a door at the hall's far end groaned open, admitting a gust of storm-lashed wind and the silhouette of a woman cloaked in midnight, her eyes glowing with Dhampir fire. Lilith Voss had arrived, her presence a blaze that threatened to consume them all. In that suspended instant, Alara's world tilted, alliance or ruin, love or the kingdom's fall. The choice hung, sharp as thorns, as the Dhampir's voice sliced the silence. "Victor, my king. And who is this mortal thorn in our eternal rose?" And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The Dhampir's voice sliced through the vaulted hall like a blade tempered in moonlight, its timbre a silken venom that coiled around the air, thickening it with the promise of old wounds reopened. Lilith Voss stood framed in the doorway, her cloak shedding rivulets of rain that pooled on the flagstones like dark blood, the storm's fury clinging to her as if the night itself had birthed her anew. Her eyes, a feral amber that burned with the hybrid fire of mortal passion and immortal hunger, swept over the scene. Victor's hand still lingering near Alara's cheek, the goblets of wine forgotten on the table, the thorny rose symbols glinting in the fractured light from the stained glass above. She was a vision of shadowed elegance, tall and lithe, her raven hair unbound and dripping, framing a face both beautiful and scarred, a faint crescent mark across her brow from the exile that had branded her an outcast. Born 30 years past in the fog-veiled underbelly of London, to a mortal seer mother and a treacherous vampiric lord who had sired her in a night of forbidden alliance, Lilith's traumas ran deep. The rejection by both worlds, the betrayal of her lover's court that had driven her to wander the fringes of eternity. Her desires burned fierce, to reclaim her place, to forge bonds through fire and blood that would end the wars encroaching from human realms. And beneath it all, a lingering ache for Victor, the king who had once held her in the throes of a romance as volatile as gunpowder. Alara stepped back, her pulse thundering in her ears like the distant cannonade of battles long past, the warmth of Victor's touch evaporating into the chill that death had never fully relinquished. The goblet's remnants sloshed in her grip, the spiced wine now tasting of ash on her tongue, as if the elixir's mercy had soured in the face of this intruder. Rationalization surged, a hallucination born of the castle's shadows, a fever's cruel jest. But the woman's presence was too visceral, too textured, the wet silk of her gown clinging to curves honed by survival, the faint scent of ozone and wild herbs wafting from her skin, mingling with the vault's incense like a profane offering. "Who?" Alara whispered, her voice fracturing, green eyes wide with the dawning horror of entanglement. She was no pawn, she told herself, yet the locket at her throat burned, the thorny rose a brand linking her to this stranger's bloodline, a cousin from scandalous whispers in her family's fractured history. Victor withdrew his hand slowly, his obsidian gaze hardening into the mask of a king schooled in betrayals, the silver scar on his jaw tightening as memories flooded back. The nights of passion with Lilith amid the ruins of forgotten strongholds, their alliance a blaze that had nearly toppled his throne when her hybrid nature ignited rival factions. He had ended it not from disdain, but ethical necessity. Her blood too potent a lure for the court's ambitions, her love a curse that invited war rather than redemption. "Lilith," he said, his tone measured, resonant as the toll of a funeral bell, stepping between the women like a sentinel forged from midnight. "Your timing fractures more than the storm. This is Alara Voss, kin to you, unwittingly drawn to these halls. Speak your purpose, but tread carefully. The oaths that bind me are not so easily sundered." Lilith's lips curved in a smile that held no warmth, only the sharp edge of possession as she advanced, her boots leaving damp imprints on the stone, each step echoing like a heartbeat in the hush. The air hummed with tension, the velvet drapes stirring in an unseen wind, carrying the low moan of rain against the walls, a sensory dirge underscoring the ritual unfolding. She halted mere feet away, her amber eyes raking over Alara with predatory curiosity, then settling on Victor, laced with the intimacy of shared sins. "Kin? Ah, the threads of blood weave strangely. I come not for personal ghosts, my king, but for the kingdom's salvation. The human empires muster, armies from Vienna and beyond, armed with crucifixes and cannon, their spies unearthing our pacts like graves. The councils demand alliance, sealed in fire and blood, my hybrid essence. It can bind the fractious lords, forge a front unbreakable. But whispers reach me of a mortal in your sanctum, one whose scent carries the faint trace of your elixir. Have you broken your vow at last? For her?" Alara's chest tightened, not with illness now, but with the raw ache of exposure, her fingers clenching the locket until thorns drew pinpricks of blood, warm and real against her skin. The vault's colors deepened, the ruby light from the glass pooling like spilled wine at their feet, the black velvet shadows wrapping around Lilith like a lover's embrace. She felt the invisible death shift, no longer a passive observer, but an active force, urging her toward flight or confrontation, its chill breath ghosting her neck. "I am no vow," she interjected, her voice gaining steel from the defiance Victor had kindled, stepping forward despite the tremor in her limbs. "I sought sanctuary from my own decay, not to unravel your eternal games. If blood ties me to you, Lilith, then speak plain. What fire and blood do you bring that threatens this fragile peace?" Lilith laughed, a sound like shattering crystal, low and melodic, echoing off the scarred oak table where maps of ancient battlefields lay unfurled, their inks faded, but potent with memory. She shrugged off her cloak, revealing a gown of deep crimson velvet, embroidered with thorny vines that mirrored the symbols binding them all, a deliberate echo, Ilara realized, from the shared lineage of loss. Peace? There is no peace in eternity, cousin. Only choices. Fade into the human fray or rise with us. Victor knows this. The wars that scarred him, the betrayals that stole his wife, they pale against what's coming. I offer alliance. My blood to rally the Dhampirs scattered in exile, to seal pacts with the old houses. But it demands sacrifice. A king's oath broken, perhaps, to bind us true. Her gaze flicked to Victor, heavy with unspoken history. Their romance a tempest of nights in hidden grottos, where passion had blurred into strategy, only for her exile to follow when rivals framed her as a threat to his solitary rule. Victor's solitude cracked further, his ethical core twisting like roots in storm-torn earth. He had desired redemption through isolation, sparing others his curse, yet Ilara's presence had ignited a light he could not extinguish. A love resisted, now inevitable, coexisting with the guilt of Lilith's return. The air thickened with their shared breaths, slow and deliberate, the distant thunder syncing with the philosophical undercurrent. Was redemption found in embracing the damned, or in letting wars consume the isolated heart? He placed a hand on Ilara's shoulder, the gesture protective, intimate, sending a shiver through her that warred with the pain of this revelation. The alliance you propose, Lilith, ignites more than borders. Ilara is no mere mortal now. The elixir has woven her into our tapestry. To heal her fully, it would mean choice, for her and for me. But your fire risks all, kingdom, heart, the very redemption we seek. Lilith's expression fractured, amber eyes flashing with the shadow of old love and fresh betrayal, her hand reaching out as if to reclaim what the years had stolen. The moment stretched, sensory and profound. The drip of wax from a nearby candelabrum, the metallic tang of Ilara's pricked finger mingling with the room's incense, the cool draft carrying whispers of encroaching armies. Ilara felt the transformation stir within, a strength blooming from fragility, the love for Victor no longer rationalized, but a force as damning as it was redemptive. Yet as Lilith's fingers brushed Victor's arm, a spark of Dhampir energy crackled, illuminating the hall in ethereal gold, the thorny rose symbols glowing like embers. In that blaze of light and shadow, Ilara made her choice unspoken, not to flee, but to stand, her hand covering Victor's, binding them against the storm. But Lilith's voice cut through, laced with desperate urgency. Then witness, King. The seal begins now, with blood from us all. She drew a slender dagger from her bodice, its blade etched with thorns, and sliced her palm, crimson welling like a vow. The air ignited with possibility and peril, the ritual demanding participation or ruin. Victor's eyes met Ilara's, the weight of eternity hanging in the balance, love's redemption or the kingdom's blood-soaked fall. As the first drop hit the stone, sizzling like a promise forged in fire, Ilara's world teetered on the edge of irreversible transformation, the invisible death laughing in the wings. The drop of Lilith's blood hit the flagstone with a sizzle that echoed like a soul's first gasp, the crimson blooming outward in a fractal pattern that caught the ruby light from the stained glass, turning the vaulted hall into a cathedral of impending doom. The air thickened, charged with the acrid tang of seared stone and the underlying copper of vitae, a scent that clawed at Ilara's senses, stirring the fragile barrier between her mortal frailty and the awakening vigor in her veins. She stared at the dagger in Lilith's hand, its thorny etchings glinting like accusations, the blade now slick and warm from the Dhampir's deliberate wound. Victor stood rigid between them, his obsidian eyes flickering with the torment of a king cornered by fate, the silver scar on his jaw a stark reminder of betrayals past, nights when similar rituals had sealed alliances only to unravel into rivers of fire and loss. Ilara's heart hammered, a wild rhythm against the cage of her ribs, the locket's thorny rose pressing into her chest like a lover's insistent whisper. The elixir's warmth coursed through her still, a borrowed fire that made her skin prickle with unnatural heat, but now it warred with the chill of revelation. This was no mere family reunion, no shadowed romance from Victor's confessions. Lilith's arrival dragged her into the kingdom's underbelly, where love and loyalty twisted into weapons, and the human world's encroaching wars, armies from Vienna's iron forges, spies with maps of ancient crypts, loomed like thunderheads ready to burst. She rationalized the pull toward Victor as survival's desperate grasp, yet in this moment, with Lilith's amber gaze boring into her like a brand, it felt like a curse blooming inevitable, redemptive in its pain, damning in its depth. "Join or witness," Lilith urged, her voice a husky melody laced with the desperation of exile, extending the dagger hilt first toward Ilara. Blood trickled from her palm, tracing veins of shadow down her wrist, staining the crimson velvet of her gown. The Dhampir's face, scarred and fierce, softened fractionally, a glimpse of the woman who had once wandered London's fog-choked alleys, much like Ilara's own youth before her hybrid blood marked her for rejection. Traumas bound them. Lilith's mother, the seer who had foreseen empire's fall, yet could not save her daughter from the court's scorn. The romance with Victor, a blaze of stolen nights in Carpathian ruins, where passion had forged temporary peace amid political sieges, only for betrayal to exile her when rivals whispered of her power as a threat to the throne. "Our blood, cousin, yours, mine, the king's, can seal the alliance. Bind the fractious lords against the human tide. Refuse, and we all bleed alone." Victor's hand tightened on Ilara's shoulder, his touch a cool anchor amid the sensory storm. The velvet drapes rustling like conspirators. The distant rain's patter a mournful counterpoint to the thunder's growl. The faint crackle of Lilith's blood as it etched runes into the stone. Invisible to mortal eyes, but humming with ancient power. He leaned close, his breath a whisper against her ear, carrying the faint aroma of aged forests and unspoken oaths. This ritual, it demands truth, Ilara. Not just blood, but choice. To mingle with hers would entwine you deeper, offer strength against your illness, but invite the wars into your heart. My oath fractures already. To let you cut would be to claim you as mine in eternity's shadow. His voice cracked, philosophical introspection bleeding into raw confession, the guilt of centuries weighing his words. He had desired solitude as redemption, a penance for his wife's death in the crossfire of vampiric intrigue, yet Ilara's presence had stirred a light he could not douse. A love that promised transformation, coexisting with the suffering it inevitably wrought. Ilara's fingers trembled as she reached for the dagger, the metal's chill biting into her palm like death's own kiss, hovering in the space between resistance and surrender. The invisible specter of mortality lingered at her elbow, its presence a cold draft that raised the fine hairs on her arms, urging her to reclaim the fragile life she had begged for upon arrival. No entanglements, no eternal wars. Her traumas resurfaced in a rush. The abandonment in London's soot-veiled tenements, where siblings had barred doors against her cough. The lover's ghost, his Crimean promises dissolving into silence, leaving her disillusioned, adrift in a world that prized the hail over the hollow. Yet Victor's ethical solitude mirrored her own isolation, his desire for redemption echoing her buried yearning for touch unbroken by decay. The love between them was no fairy tale spark, but a slow burn, resisted through rational veils of pity and fever, now inevitable as the tide of blood before her. With a breath that steadied her resolve, she drew the blade across her palm, the sting sharp and immediate, crimson welling like tears long withheld. The pain grounded her, textured and real, the warm trickle down her fingers, the metallic scent mingling with Lilith's. The faint sizzle as her drop joined the pool on the stone. A ritual ignited, the air shimmering with ethereal heat, threads of gold and shadow weaving between their wounds, pulling Victor inexorably forward. He extended his own hand, fangs grazing his lip in a moment of vulnerability, slicing deep enough to draw the rich, immortal essence that had tempered her wine. Their blood converged, the thorny rose symbols on locket and ring pulsing in sync, a symbolic bond that bound not just alliance, but souls. The hall trembled subtly, as if the castle itself inhaled the vow, fire and blood sealing pacts against the human empire's advance, rallying Dhampirs from exile, fortifying the hidden realms. Lilith's eyes widened, amber depths reflecting triumph laced with sorrow, her hand clasping Alara's in a grip that spoke of shared lineage, the hybrid fire warming the mortal chill. "It is done," she breathed, the words a revelation of transformation. Ilara felt it then, a surge through her veins, the tuberculosis's grip loosening like frost under dawn, strength blooming from fragility. Victor's love a redemptive force that healed without fully claiming her mortality. Yet in the intimacy of the merge, glimpses flashed. Lilith's lingering passion for the king, a betrayal's shadow from their past romance that could fracture this new triad. Victor's guilt deepening, the ethical king torn between throne and heart, knowing this alliance invited wars not just of borders, but of jealousies and old wounds. As the ritual's glow faded, leaving them breathless in the vault's hush, Alara pulled back, her bandaged palm throbbing with promise and peril. Victor's gaze met hers, profound and shadowed. The love between them no longer resisted, but a living curse, beautiful in its suffering, eternal in its choice. But Lilith's smile faltered, her voice slicing the afterglow. The seal holds, but the courts converge at dawn. They bring not just allies, but demands, a queen for the king to legitimize the blood pact. And if you refuse, cousin, the fire we forged turns to war within these walls. The weight of that dilemma hung, sharp as thorns, as footsteps echoed from the corridors beyond, harbingers of the kingdom's unraveling. Alara's newfound vitality pulsed with dread. Had she chosen redemption, or ignited the very betrayal that could doom them all? Like if you'd choose the thorn's embrace for a love that mends the eternal fracture. The footsteps echoed through the corridors like the inexorable march of forgotten legions, each one a hammer strike against the fragile seal they had forged in blood and fire. Alara Voss stood in the vaulted hall's dimming glow, her bandaged palm throbbing with a rhythm that synced to her quickened pulse, the thorny rose locket at her throat a warm weight against her skin, now more anchor than relic, pulsing with the mingled vitae that coursed through her veins. The ritual's aftershocks lingered, a subtle vitality that chased the tuberculosis's shadow from her lungs, leaving her breaths deep and unlabored, her limbs steady where frailty had once reigned. Yet the healing felt like a double-edged vow, redemption laced with curse, as if Victor's essence had woven thorns into her very marrow, binding her to this world of eternal strife. Lilith Voss paced the scarred oak table, her crimson gown whispering against the stone, the scent of rain and wild herbs clinging to her like a shroud of unresolved passion. Her amber eyes, still alight with the ritual's residual fire, darted between Alara and Victor, a Dhampir's hunger warring with the ethical restraint she had honed in exile. Born of scandal in London's veiled underbelly, her traumas etched deeper than the crescent scar on her brow. The mother's visions that foretold her outcast fate, the father's betrayal that sired her only to abandon her to the court's scorn. Her desire had always burned for belonging. To Victor, in nights of fevered alliance amid Carpathian ruins, where their romance had briefly quelled the political tempests. To the kingdom now, through blood pacts that could end the human empire's encroachment. But as the footsteps grew nearer, her expression fractured, revealing the solitary guilt of one who had chosen eternity's edge, only to find it sharper than promised. Victor Draven, the vampire king, remained a pillar of shadowed resolve, his obsidian gaze fixed on the doorway where torchlight flickered like hesitant stars. The silver scar across his jaw caught the ruby hues from the stained glass, a testament to the wars that had birthed his oath, centuries of sieges where Ottoman blades and vampiric daggers had carved his isolation. He had ruled ethically, solitarily, sealing alliances in calculated blood without the vulnerability of love. His deepest trauma, the wife's mortal death in the crossfire of throne-hungry rivals. Ilara's arrival had unraveled that solitude, her disillusioned fragility mirroring his own, igniting a love resisted through rational veils of mercy and madness, now inevitable as the dawn threatening the horizon. "The courts," he murmured, his voice a resonant timbre that vibrated through the air like distant thunder. "Come not for counsel, but conquest. Lilith speaks true. Their demand for a queen is no mere formality. It binds the pact in legitimacy, quells the fractious lords who whisper of weakness in my throne." Ilara's fingers brushed his, the contact electric, textured with the cool silk of his skin against her newfound warmth, a sensory bridge between mortality's flicker and eternity's abyss. The hall's atmosphere enveloped them, the velvet drapes heavy with the storm's damp, the faint crackle of embers in a forgotten brazier, the metallic tang of their mingled blood lingering like an unspoken confession. Death, that invisible sentinel, hovered no longer at her shoulder, but diffused into the room's corners, yielding to the transformation she had embraced. Yet doubt gnawed, philosophical and raw. Was this strength a gift of love's redemption, or the first chain in eternity's curse? Her traumas resurfaced in the quiet, the abandonment in soot-choked alleys, the lovers vanishing amid Crimean fogs, leaving her adrift in disillusion. Victor had offered touch unbroken, a light in her shadows, but now the kingdom's wars threatened to eclipse it. The doors groaned open, admitting a procession of cloaked figures, vampiric lords from the hidden enclaves, their faces pale masks of intrigue, eyes gleaming with the hunger of old betrayals. They fanned out around the table, maps of border skirmishes unfurling like wounds, depicting human armies massing at Vienna's gates, silver-tipped lances glinting in scout reports. At their forefront stood Lord Thorn, a gaunt elder with eyes like chipped obsidian, his voice slicing the hush. "My king, the seal you forged with Dhampir blood is potent, but fragile without a queen's hand. The Empire's advance, cannon smoke chokes the passes, spies unearth our crypts. Name her, or the alliance fractures, and war turns inward." Lilith stepped forward, her bandaged palm raised like a banner, the thorny vines on her gown catching the torchlight in golden threads. "I offer myself," she declared, her tone steady yet laced with the sorrow of unrequited fire, amber gaze locking on Victor. "Our history binds us, passion forged in ruins, alliances tempered in blood. Let me stand as queen, seal this with the eternity we once shared. Ilara. She is kin, but mortal still, a thorn that could wither in the blaze." Ilara's breath caught, the air thickening with the intimacy of choice, the scent of aged leather from the maps mingling with the incense of ritual remnants. She felt the pull of Victor's love like a current, sensual and profound, his ethical solitude cracking for her, the guilt that marked him yielding to a redemptive ache. Rationalization dissolved. This was no fever dream, but a moment of transformation where suffering's beauty lay in its capacity to forge light from shadow. Stepping to his side, she clasped his hand openly, the thorny rose ring on his finger pressing into her skin. "No," she said, her voice clear, resonant with the strength blooming within. A woman's defiance, born of dissolution, turned to purpose. "The queen you seek is not a relic of past flames, Lilith, nor a pawn in your exiles. Victor's oath broke for redemption, not conquest. If alliance demands a heart, let it be one that chooses freely, mortal or eternal, love overthrown. The lords murmured, shadows shifting like specters. But Victor's expression softened, a rare fracture in his kingly armor. He turned to her, cupping her face with a tenderness that silenced the hall, his lips brushing her forehead in a ritual of quiet vow, the cool press of eternity against her warmth, a sensory communion of breath and pulse. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, he whispered, echoing his earlier confession, now laced with compassion. You have chosen life, Ilara, and in that you redeem us all. The pact holds not through queens or blood alone, but through this, love that sees the soul, mends the fracture. Lilith's eyes dimmed, the Dhampir fire yielding to understanding's ache, her hand dropping as she nodded, the shared bloodline weaving a new thread of alliance, not rivalry, but reluctant kinship. The lords bowed, the maps rolling shut like sealed fates, the encroaching wars held at bay by this ethical stand. Yet as dawn's first light pierced the stained glass, painting the hall in gelido whites and deep reds, Ilara felt the curses whisper. Her vitality was no full turning, but a bridge, eternity's door ajar, demanding one final choice. Victor's gaze held hers, profound and shadowed, the thorny rose binding them in beauty's wound. In that suspended dawn, love proved both salvation and shadow, transforming suffering into a quiet eternity where choices lingered, eternal and unbroken. The kingdom stood, redeemed in fire's wake, but the heart's thorns ensured no peace without pain. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts.